Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Fahrbach. According to a recent article from the Financial Times, the Kremlin is using the Wagner Group to recruit perpetrators of sabotage in Europe. Now, beyond these European operations, Russia's mercenary networks, including the rebranded Africa Corps, are actively shaping conflicts across the Sahel and Central Africa, destabilizing governance and indirectly influencing migration flows toward Europe. How these military, economic, and informational strategies intersect with European security and African agency will be central to today's discussion with our guest, Ulf Laessing, Head of Regional Program, Sahel Adenauer Foundation. Thanks so much for joining us here in the studio.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to begin with Europe first. We have this article from the Financial Times. The idea now that the Wagner Group is concentrating in actual sabotage activity, does that mean in your mind that they're concentrating now away from Africa, or is this a parallel strategy? What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's a parallel strategy. They actually started in Europe ages ago, even in America, several elections in Europe trying to interfere there, and yeah, that's where they started. From there they moved to Africa, basically using the same model to start disinformation to undermine Western interests.
Mm-hmm. So also let's focus on Africa, and particularly where you have experience. You've been based in Mali for the better part of 5 years, so you've seen it on the ground. Tell us right now, I mean, this rebrand of the Africa Corps, which is Wagner became Africa Corps, are they any less effective? Are they, let's say, still operationally powerful? Where are they mostly active, and what's the current situation there?
Yeah, Mali is their focus originally as Wagner. They arrived in late 21 to help the government fight jihadists, but part of the job from Wagner was always also to try to steer migration to Europe and to undermine European interests, to frame Russia as a non-imperialist partner. And they're still doing this. It's now rebranded as Africa Corps, more than a technical issue. You know, it's now part that Africa Corps reports to the Ministry of Defense. So the Russian state wanted to take full control, but it hasn't much changed on the ground. It's just a new brand.
Mm-hmm. But also, I think it was the issue of control there, because I mean, Wagner was very much loyal to Prigozhin. I mean, he is no longer alive. I mean, were they successful in, let's say, orchestrating that control over this group? Are they now directly listening more to the Kremlin, or is there still, let's say, an operational disconnect from operations on the ground?
In Mali, they managed to take over operation. In one African country, the Central African Republic, there's still Wagner, because Prigozhin made so much inroads there. They even, they built in honor of him, a monument of Prigozhin in front of the Russian embassy. So he's extremely popular there because Wagner there improved security in this country hit by conflicts. That's why the Russians haven't been able to, transfer the mercenaries to the African Corps in the Central African Republic. In the other countries, Niger, Burkina, Libya, Mali, it's now the Africa Corps.
Mm-hmm. And also, I mean, looking at the largest stretch of territory, Sahel, that's a big part. Central Africa includes also its focus on Mali, Niger, as you mentioned. For a time, and we've had some coups there. We've had also a larger French and European presence. The Americans were also there. What's the state on the ground now? What is Europe's footprint there in the Sahel and West Africa?
Yeah, Europe used to be the dominant, power there, especially France, former colonial power. The rest of the world wasn't really interested in. But the French, they overstayed their welcome. They never let go these former colonies and got very unpopular. The Russians exploited this, especially after, NATO made this hasty retreat from Kabul, Afghanistan. We all remember these pictures, people flying from aircraft. And the Malians kind of panicked, who's going to protect us? Maybe the French will leave. And then Putin was there to offer the mercenaries, Prigozhin, and that's how Russia arrived there. And since then, they've really expanded. Most Europeans are left. Germany still has an embassy. The French army is gone. European Union mission is hardly present anymore. Unfortunately, Europe has kind of given up on the Sahel. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But it's not just, let's also distinguish, it's with Wagner Group, Africa Corps, it's very much a mercenary military element. I mean, there's also a lot of extortion, mercenaries that have been quite brutal in terms of certain crackdowns, propping up certain regimes, violence. But at the same time, let's talk about also the disinformation angle, the narrative angle, misinformation, hybrid. Where is that looking? Because I mean, if we look at the retreat of outlets like Russia Today, Sputnik, how are they currently positioned in Africa?
Yeah, I mean, Russia Today has been expanding. They're doing reports in French. They even offer free content, French, radio reports to radio stations or TV stations. So that's, it's part of their effort to shape the narrative. Russia has also opened so-called Russia houses, cultural institute officially, to spread their narrative, and they also work very much on social media. They have a network of influencers who report to Russia. There's they even created an own news agency called Africa Initiative, specifically targeting the former French colonies. And it's a one-stop shop from mainstream media, if you can call them Russia Today, up to social media troll campaigns.
Mm-hmm. And that is very much pushing Kremlin talking points. I'm just curious, how receptive are people there? You're on the ground. How receptive is that messaging coming from, as you said, the Russian influence? And what also kind of impact does it have in terms of migration? We're hearing this as well, that Russian operations are pushing migration flows into Europe, some maybe even ending here on the border with Belarus.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Russians are successful because, the Sahel is one of the most underdeveloped, poorest regions in the world. There's not really mainstream media. Most people get their news from WhatsApp, from YouTube. And the Western media are retreating. Today, Deutsche Welle announced they will cutting jobs. Other mainstream Western media outlets doing less and less. So the space is being filled by the Russians with all their ridiculous claims, such as the West or France is supporting terrorists, but people unfortunately believe it. And the second point regarding migration, you mentioned the Russian mercenaries are very brutal. More than around 150,000 people have left Mali, fled to Mauritania. I met some of them in refugee camps in Mauritania, where they talk about the experience where Russians arrived, burned their villages, labeled them as terrorists. And now Malians are among the top 3 nationals arriving on Canary Island. This is the West Atlantic coast by boat, and that way they're in the European Union and make then their way to Spain or to Central Europe.
Mm-hmm. In your mind and experience, I mean, it sounds like what you're characterizing is that Europe, the European Union, European players here, if it be security forces, if it be the narrative, if it be a messaging, is losing against Russia at the moment. Like, how can we catch up? How can Europe offer some kind of counter to this?
Yeah, Europe is kind of blocked. I mean, France used to be in charge of the Sahel or West African file. The rest of Europe didn't have an interest. The French had to leave. They don't really accept it. They don't want others really to do much. And the rest of Europe is kind of like Germany, Italy. They're also concerned about migration, but don't want to upset the French. So not much is happening. Unfortunately, in Poland, other Central European countries, they don't really have an interest in West Africa. So I hope, there is more of a voice always also coming from Poland to take a bigger role, because if we don't, engage ourselves with people, then the Russians will do,
But at the same time, we've had interest, particularly in Africa and West Africa, also from Poland as well. I mean, we've had trips by certain authorities, but also this messaging. I remember this from some time ago. Is a messaging, let's say, coming? If the people remember colonialism, as you said, France, etc., that might have a negative reaction, but does Poland in any way, not being a colonial power, have any, let's say, more chance of a message that could be more friendly to people in Western Africa, Africa as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Poland doesn't have any colonial history. It's seen as neutral. The doors would be open if Poland were dedicate more resources to do more in West Africa. I mean, it's difficult. I understand that there are so many crises: Ukraine, Trump, Greenland, Venezuela. But would be also good to pay a bit of attention, at least maybe on European level, to push the European Union to do a bit more there and not just leave an entire region to the Russians.
Mm-hmm. And also, I think I'm curious about what you think. I mean, the Nigerian government has publicly warned its own citizens about illegal recruitment, as we've seen and hearing reports that certain African citizens are being pushed and shipped off to Russia and then to Ukraine, to the front lines. Do you think at this point, will certain African governments, step in more, maybe make a case against Russia in all this, or are they still in the, let's say, reins of the Kremlin?
No, I think it's changing a bit. Kenya is concerned. I mean, they want to bring back also their nationals who have been forced to fight in Ukraine, I mean, Nigeria as well. So I think, yeah, that's an image problem for the Russians now. But, you know, people are being lured. They go to a Russian cultural institute, being promised, you know, to study in Moscow, and then they find themselves in the Donbass, being forced to fight in Ukraine. So yeah, that definitely right now is a negative impact, you know, for Russia's reputation. There's a lot on social media criticizing people, you know, Russia, and also governments, African governments step in. So hopefully that could be the start of a turning point.
Mm-hmm. So let's look also in the future, even the next few months or a year from now. What can Europe offer? Is that something regionally, collectively? What's missing to turn the tide of against Russian influence in the region?
Yeah, we should do more. I mean, not cut back on you know, on public broadcasting, like Deutsche Welle now reducing its coverage. Others have been cutting. That's the wrong signal, because that's the area, disinformation media, where the Russians are so active. Mm-hmm. And also, Europe can continue to provide development, humanitarian aid. It's one of the poorest regions. Many people are desperate. They want to come to Europe. That way, that kind of cushions also a bit the, you know, the risk that people try to migrate via Libya or via the Mauritania and Canary Island to coming to Europe. So that's a role definitely Europe can play. Even if we don't want to be close to military governments who suppress freedoms, we can still work in the humanitarian aid.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also, as you said, it's communication, and we said more voice from Poland. That's also with TVP World. We have our own correspondent there, Sophia Ba, reporting in West Africa. So as you said, more involvement by Poland, other players. So just before we quickly end, one sentence, optimistic, negative, mixed about the future of European, let's say, voice in Africa?
Well, I hope the Europeans got the message. You know, we've seen migration from Africa rising, and we see the Russians are very active. So I think the Europeans slowly get the message. And yeah, the Russians also really damaged their reputation with, you know, brutality of mercenaries. So there's a way, an opening for us to be more active there.
All right, so I see an opening is there. Thank you so much. Ulf Laessing there from the Adenauer Foundation. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for more. Goodbye.